Right. Well, hello, everybody, officially. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Stephanie Jordan. I am the co-founder of Avallen Spirits and also the founder of Drinking Out Loud. And most importantly, for today, I will be your host of this fourth edition of the Positively Charged series. Over there in the shed is my brother in arms, Mr. Timothy Etherington Judge, the other co-founder of Avallen and also the man behind Healthy Hospo. Now, today is our, as I said, fourth installment of this series, which we created in our lockdown Zoom board back in March when Tim and I were trying to work out how the heck we could continue to positively inspire and drive meaningful conversations around sustainability in the drinks industry. And the intention of Positively Charged is very much around co-created and co-curated knowledge, which hopefully will ignite and inspire anyone watching this live or in a recording to basically go off and do something a little different that might just make that small change that will improve ultimately life on this planet for all of us. It seems like a really big ask, but we truly believe that all together we can be the change. Just as importantly, before we kick off, I'd like to take a moment to thank our strategic partners, Wonderworks Communications, the wonderful Wonderworks. The ladies are usually online, so big shout out to you, fantastic people. Wonderworks have supported us from the outset with our Planet Positive Spirits brand, but also our sponsors, so to speak, of Positively Charged, ensuring that we are reaching as many people as possible because they are fervent and passionate believers in planet positivity within the drinks industry. I think it's also super, super important to take a moment to actually thank all of you that have connected and are watching this, because ultimately it's through your passion, dedication, and determination for a better drinks industry that we are able to continue to rock on and bring these nugget bite-sized insights to drive that positive change. Right, so today's session is called Causing a Sustainable Stir. So basically, over the past 10 years, I'm sure we can all agree that our global drinks industry has become that very thing, global. And ultimately, bartenders and brand ambassadors have been flown half the way around the world for a one-off guest shifting bartending session and/or branding category training. And this is happening left, right, and center, or at least it was in a pre-COVID world. Brand pop-ups and industry trade shows have grown increasingly international and frequent. They are lavish, they are sophisticated, and there's almost this expectation that we need to rock up to absolutely every single one of them, whether we are a brand, a bartender, a brand ambassador, and that obviously has some consequences. Competitions have become huge global events. Quite a few of us on this chat know all about that. And there really is no denying that there is an impact, and this impact is environmental, but this impact is also personal. It can affect our mental and physical well-being. So ultimately, from what I'd like to call abusive CO2 emissions, and Tim and I will put our hands up and say we've been very much part of that abuse, through to single plastic usage, unnecessary POS and builds that have been made to last just one night. They're having an ever increasing impact on the environment. And, you know, I think it's really important to state that this session isn't about pointing fingers, and we're not about to tell you all to stop doing all the things I've just mentioned. What we want to do is first and foremost, bring awareness in the room. And I truly believe this with everything in life. Every powerful conversation starts with the awareness. So the first kind of order of the day is to just agree, establish, connect, and observe that, yeah, our industry has a negative impact on the environment. And a lot of us have been accountable to that. And so what are we going to do about it? Now that we know and we understand, what can we possibly do to pivot our industry for the better? So today, our amazing speakers, and I do assure you they are exceptionally amazing, are going to dive into this subject to help us better understand how as an industry we can pivot to adopt cutting-edge technology, adapt and build a low-impact future in a post-COVID world. So without further ado, Mr. Timothy Etherington Judge, would you please introduce our panelists?
Yes, thank you, Steph. Very excited for today. I think this is one of the strongest panel lineups we've had so far and positively charged. So let's do this in alphabetical order. So we'll start with Alex, bottom left or top left corner. Say hi, Alex. So Alex Brooks is the tech nerd from the digital future. He's the man whose Wi-Fi doesn't really work properly at the moment, and he's had to borrow his son's gaming headphones. He's Chief Strategy Officer for Arcade Limited. He's part of a team who's pioneering augmented and virtual reality technologies. And he's literally creating the future in front of our eyes, and probably has a full Tron working bicycle in his garage. So Alex is going to talk to us about the advances in digital technology, AR, VR, and how brands can bring that technology to bear to create events that are not possible in the real world and only possible in the digital world. Then we have Ara Carvallo. Ara is a pocket-sized titan of our industry. Not only does she have three masters, she's part of the brains trust of Distill Ventures, and you can understand why with 3 masters. And she's also the co-founder of Barra Mexico, which is the world's first vegan, carbon neutral, and plastic-free drinks trade show. Bottom right corner, I have long-time friend, Mr. Jacob Briars, who was once the 7th most famous bartender in New Zealand, and 42 Below vodka's, sorry, the 42 Below's former vodka professor. Jacob now heads up trade advocacy for Bacardi, co-owns a cocktail bar in New Zealand called Clipper, is co-founder of Kinafina tonic water in New Zealand, but perhaps his biggest claim to fame is having Jacinda Ardern and the Flight of the Conchords on speed dial. And last but very much not least is another good friend, Jenna, all the way from Senegal via London, with a little stint in Mumbai at the same time where we used to hang out. Jenna is Diageo's global explorer, hiking mountains of curiosity and blazing a new kind of trail as a brand ambassador. So as a whiskey-loving brand ambassador and conscious citizen of the world. So these are our super cool guest speakers. Ara is going to cover trade shows and how we can move towards a more sustainable vision of trade shows in the future. Jacob is going to cover Bacardi sustainability work, talk about global competitions such as Bacardi Legacy and all their work they're doing there. And then Jenna is going to talk about the future of the brand ambassador and how she is working with Diageo to reform their vision of brand ambassadors going forward into the future.
And Alex would just talk about the future. He is the future.
Alex is the future.
Alex is the future. So just for those of you that haven't joined one of our sessions before, very simple way of working. All our panelists will have 10-15 minutes to talk about their subject matters. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box, which you should find at the bottom of your screens. We will then open up to all panelists the Q&As at the end of the session, unless there's any kind of burning questions, which we might be able to address immediately. So without further ado, let us begin this session with Professor Briars.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Tim, for that amazing intro, and Stephanie as well. It's a great pleasure to be here. Although I should point out, obviously, much like Jerry Thomas, Professor was a title we sort of gave ourselves half jokingly. So with Ara's 3 masters, you're in the presence of a real academic expert. I merely played one on social media. So I'm going to talk a few things. Perhaps about the evolution of the industry, the role that companies large and small can be playing in sort of lessening their impact. What I think probably the last 3 to 4 months have given us the opportunity to sort of reframe and repivot some of our particular activities. And then talk about kind of, I guess, possibly the limitations of a couple of those models as well. Just to give a little bit of context, Tim set me up very, very nicely and far more politely than I probably would have done for myself. But as Tim alluded to, I'm from New Zealand, which, if there's a global kind of tube map or metro map of world bartending hotspots, it's Cockfosters on that map, right? It is literally at the end of the line. And so it's a country that very keenly, when I was running bars there, we very keenly felt our isolation from the rest of the world, and the feeling that we were sort of adrift from some of the trends that were happening, and kind of slightly disconnected from that bartending world. And that was a long time ago, actually, obviously even older than Galaxy A5. This is kind of, I started bartending in 1999. So we really felt that that we were on the cusp of a global kind of bartending renaissance and a golden age of cocktails. And for most of you on that call, none of those ideas should need much introduction. But certainly when that was starting out, we were very, very lucky that there were a very small number of people crisscrossing the world, delivering education, that trade shows such as, localized as they were helping bring a very small number of international speakers. And they were really starting to kind of thread the world together in a very slow and still very disjointed way. But what it did was it exposed people who would possibly never have otherwise seen, had the opportunity to see those things, a combination of kind of a global kind of trade show circuit, if you like, a number of kind of globe-trotting educators such as Angus Winchester, Alex Cameling, and a few people like that, who were sort of, took upon themselves the opportunity to fly around the world and spread a little bit of the gospel. And then obviously underpinning all of these things was kind of the internet, which was enabling a bit of repetition. But I think there's been a net positive for drinks companies over the last 20 years of that kind of, constant travel, that circuit of trade shows, that network of global cocktail competitions and masterclasses and those sorts of things. And I think, for us as spirits companies, so working as I do for Bacardi, and I'm sure those of us who work for some of, who work for or with some of the other large companies would say the same thing, that, total spirits consumption has gone up. The professionalization of the bartender has become a kind of permanent trend. And, we now feel much more, I guess we're both much more connected than we ever have been before. And also I would say that standards are higher than they ever have been before in terms of, the bartending industry. So I just want to say before, Stephanie used the term carbon abusive, which made me feel extremely guilty, because by that standard, I've, traveling as I have over the last 15 years, I have been a repeat carbon abuser. But I think, when we think about, the bar and restaurant industry, the global hospitality industry, demand for spirits and cocktails in the kind of ecosystem in which we live, that has been a net positive, at least if you just view it, within the world of spirits. However, that said, with that growth and with that kind of premiumization comes a responsibility for each of us to play our part, and for companies both large and small. And I think it's in particular important for those of us who have that global oversight to be able to kind of put all of those things together in some kind of cohesive understanding of the drinks industry and the impact that it's having. Because if you're a bartender in Shanghai and you're offered a guest shift from in Singapore, of course you're going to take it, right? So it's a kind of tragedy of a commons situation where each one of these kind of individual things that's happening seems small in its own instance, but taken as a total, the number of guest shifts, the number of trade shows, the number of cocktail conventions, the number of cocktail competitions, and even like those are the obvious ones because they involve flying, but also the vast number of activations that we do is all having a massive impact. And so I think, so it's definitely something that I think those of us in kind of positions where we're globally connected, and in particular, those of us who've played that part already in, having benefited from that kind of global connection, there's a responsibility on each of us to play that part. I think one of the other things we also have to recognize is that there is spirits being by their nature primarily quite old-fashioned products, right, and quite agricultural. And they tend to draw on an installed base of products that's already there, right? So, typically, many of the distilleries that produce the spirits we know and love are upwards of 100 years old. Many of the, farms that produce the agricultural products are, 100, 200, even more years old. And so the opportunity to really kind of change the total system is quite small. And that doesn't mean that there's not amazing things happening in that kind of world, but it means the opportunity to just kind of wipe the slate clean and kind of design the Tesla of spirits is reasonably small. One of the things that was appealing to me when I first joined Bacardi back in 2012 was we were getting the chance to do that for the very first time in the construction of the Bombay Sapphire Distillery, Lavistoke Mill, which is about an hour outside of London. And, that was a really rare opportunity to do a new build distillery from the start that could be built with sustainable principles, because almost every other production facility we had been built at least in the 1960s, or if not, back in the 1860s. And so there was a lot of kind of inbuilt kind of not so much waste, but your opportunity to kind of wipe the slate clean and design a system from scratch was pretty limited, which means that the ability to affect, I guess, what environmentalists would call upstream challenges was quite limited. So to touch very briefly before I get into kind of the trade shows and sorry, not trade shows, but masterclasses and cocktail competitions, a few of the things just quickly that we've sort of done upstream at Bacardi. 2014, we decided, probably a little later than we should have, that, as one of the large players, we had the ability to make an impact in terms of kind of the carbon intensity and sustainability of our production facilities. And so we made a 5-year plan, as people do, to try and kind of, positively impact and positively change those. And we managed to get our 5-year goals done within 3 years. So by 2017, we've done a 59% reduction in our greenhouse gas intensity. So basically the amount of CO2 and other emissions required to produce the same amount of product. And our water usage down by 50%, which was, but to some extent there, we had kind of done the easy lifting. So, applying those sorts of sustainable principles to production for the first time, it's quite easy to do. To go the extra mile becomes a little bit harder. But we sat down in 2017 and started to say, right, what can we do by sort of 2025? And gave ourselves some extremely ambitious goals, which we're well on the way to producing again. So another 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, another 25% reduction in water usage. Water usage being one of the hardest things to actually to minimize, because spirits primarily are water at sort of every stage of their production. And then by 2023, things that we also kind of decided that plastic was going to be one of the things that we were going to lean into most. So we led a campaign against single-use straws. And in year one, we did that in terms of just our own facilities. No single-use plastic straws anywhere in any of our offices or any of our kind of our activations. And then in year two, none in any of our guest shifts or any of our cocktail competitions or any of our consumer activations. And then partnering with a charity called Lonely Whale, whereby we were able to take 1 billion single-use straws out of circulation, right? And that's, kind of, straws are really literally just the kind of the tipping point to some extent in terms of, so I won't pretend that taking 1 billion straws out of circulation is like the be all and end all of sustainable activity, but what it did do, and the ability that, for us as a company to be able to lean into something like that and work with our partners gave us a lot more confidence to make much more ambitious targets, such as removing all of our plastic packaging by 2023. And using 100%, getting all of our landfill usage down to 0%. So all of these things are kind of much bigger goals that we were able to see the way forward to doing, thanks to the way in which we've been able to kind of do the straws initiative in a single year. People suddenly became much more confident about their ability to impact change, and I think that's hugely important. So one of the things we were also super excited about doing was, kind of the way in which our partner bars and our partner activations wanted to kind of line up with us and deal with things like these, straws, and then asking for help and how they could go further as well in terms of creating, sustainable bar programs, zero waste bar programs. I mean, again, we're not the only company that have seen this, but I think that many bars and restaurants have been eager to do this, but not sure where to go to get the help required to be able to do it. And then in large companies like Bacardi, Diageo, Pernod, we have access to production facilities and production team members who deeply understand how to create closed loop systems. And we were able to take some of that information and disperse that to bar and restaurant partners. So that's been a huge positive. I guess one of the hardest things for us to do has been, to kind of to do that kind of last mile consumer activation, because much like every other liquor company, we've really seen that consumers very much, or the public, if you like, generally love the kind of shock of the new, right? So we're in the experience age, or certainly we were until sort of the middle of March this year. So people prizing experiences, the experiences that they wanted were primarily new and shiny. And so when you were doing activations, be it, the sorts of, brand activations that you might create at a large music festival, Bacardi rum brand being, one of the world's biggest sponsors of music festivals. So, every single time you pop up at a music festival, you literally had to pop up in a new way. People want to see, a new building, they want to see a new set of bars, they want to see a new theme. And so the ability to reuse things was extremely limited. And that's been, a massive challenge as well. And I think also the, one of the, when you get down to kind of the on-trade level, so bars and restaurants, again, we've been, both proud and guilty to admit to being, one of the biggest underwriters in the industry of industry pop-ups, for want of a better term. So the proverbial guest shift that bartenders do all over the world. And those guest shifts had started to become, both increasingly baroque. So, people wanted to actually do recreations of bars and restaurants that they were actually in, but also the pace of them had become extremely frenetic. And that was partly driven by the fact that, the more guest shifts there were, the busier star tenders became. And so instead of popping up, say, and doing a week-long residency or even a month-long residency in a town, you had bartenders who tell you, I can go to Moscow or Madrid, but I can only do 3 days because then I have to go to Miami for another pop-up for a different brand. And I think, so one of the things we've been often thinking about is, what's the role of the pop-up? And what are the different ways that we can be offering guest shifts to people, and how might we do things differently? So for example, does the bartender themselves need to be the one flying on the other side of the world? Or can the benefits there are, the bartender gets a cool trip to a city they haven't seen. They get to create an in-person masterclass for the local community, and for the consumer, for the guest of the bar where they're popping up, it's a cool experience. Wow, here's Tim Judge all the way from Cornwall. That's a cool experience for people to see. But how might we do those things differently? So for example, can the host bar be the one producing the cocktails to spec in a kind of degustation, and then taking advantage of a kind of Zoom masterclass or a Zoom hosting where the famous bartender dials in from London or New York? We've already seen some of those kind of at-home hosting opportunities. The work that the guys at 28 Hong Kong Street in Singapore showed, they were actually hosting at-home cocktail parties. They would send drinks out, several hours before, and then they would do kind of hosting, bartending for the guests without the guests needing to travel to the bar. Now that was a COVID reaction, but there's necessarily no reason why we couldn't be doing that in exactly the same time. Another thing, which is, or do we need to kind of ask ourselves questions about the length of the various pop-ups? So again, is it feasible to fly to a place for 1 night, 2 nights, maximum 3 nights? And perhaps do we need to look at, instead of star tending, stage tending, right? Where you're actually coming and you're working at a bar in a kind of cross collaboration for, 1 week, 1 month, etc. I mean, one of the best examples of this, and that potentially has positive business implications as well. So one of the best examples I saw with this was Martin Newell in Hong Kong, when he was working with, I think, Diageo or LVMH, brought PDT out for a pop-up, but instead of it just being a couple of days, they actually created a recreation of the bar for a month. And the demand for that was so strong that it actually led them to open a second permanent PDT venture. Now, I don't think that would have happened if they'd just PDT had flown in and served hot dogs and and Benton's Old Fashions for 1 day. But the fact that they were able to kind of experience the business model, perhaps that longer term kind of idea of a pop-up is a much more sustainable way to be doing things as well. And then ultimately, of course, you have the kind of, digitally delivered masterclass, both for consumers and for bartenders, and which I think is, yet another way we can be saying, do we need to be flying somebody in to conduct a one-off masterclass? It's cool, it's a great experiential event, but can we be delivering those things digitally? It enables you, of course, to get much more scale, but also enables you to do things in different ways. So here in the UK, very recently, Martine Kongsrivelai, who's or Mayface, our Bacardi ambassador in the UK, delivered a Friday night rum tasting and cocktail masterclass for one of our large customers here for over 350 people on a Friday night. And there was a cool piece of packaging. We were able to send small samples of rum to them in advance. Everybody sat down, and it kind of created a social event. In a way that, with a much less of an environmental impact than if we'd flown in a great rum bartender from a famous rum bar, and also it gave us much more scale. So ordinarily that event might have been limited to 25 to 30 people, and instead this became upwards of 300. So I think there's ways that we can take what we've learned from the kind of COVID world and hopefully emerging into a new normal soon, and take some of those lessons and say, what did we get in the habit of doing that seems to have a smaller environmental footprint that we can then cascade over to the way in which we conduct masterclasses without the needing to be traveling in such a frenetic way. I still think there is going to be an amazing role for things like in-person things. I think it's very hard to replace things like cocktail competitions and the positive impact of community that they play. I was lucky enough to get to know Tim many years ago in New Zealand when we used to run the 42 Below World Cup, which was sort of an environmentally obscene, journey where we would fly people from all over the world into New Zealand. Upwards of 100 people at a time. We were, I think, at the time, the first carbon neutral or carbon offset cocktail competition. But also the other thing we did was that was really the only kind of marketing activation that we did. So even though it was kind of extremely high impact, we didn't do music festivals, and we didn't do kind of sponsorship, and we didn't do large in-store kind of plastic gondolas and those sorts of things. There was just this cocktail competition that ran for a week, and we hoped that people would spend the other 51 weeks of the year talking about it. I remember that was, I think, 2007, your year, Tim, and I remember at the end of that, Angus Winchester said, these sorts of things are really, they have a very positive impact on the bartending world. They're kind of like the Ebola virus. And this was at a time, which is perhaps not a quote that has aged as well as it should have anymore, but the idea being that people got back on the plane from this far-flung corner of the world, having had a one-off opportunity to exchange ideas with somebody from Miami, somebody from Manchester, somebody from Melbourne, and then they would all disperse back to their various parts of the world with these new ideas and this kind of new kind of idea exchange and kind of new ways of looking at things. And I still think those things remain really powerful. So if we're going to remove the role of, the global masterclass circuit, or minimize the impact of the trade show circuit or those sorts of things, we'll have to find new ways for those ideas to get shared and for those networks and community to get built, because I fundamentally believe they remain a very powerful thing. And I believe that's my allotted time. So.
And you know what? I'm sure all of us agree. Human connections are everything, and being able to see each other in person in different communities around the world has been so impactful for all of us personally. So thank you very much, Jacob. For me, there's just two things that I'd like to comment on. I think firstly, you touched upon something at the end, which is something I'd love us all to consider, and something Tim's already been thinking up in his magical head of solutions, which is this concept of sort of carbon credits that we would all have, either as individuals or brands and companies, a set amount allocated, and it was up to us to spend them as we chose. And as you said, 42 Below did that one thing, and hell, it was impactful in all the ways, but they didn't do all the others. And so there was that awareness and that understanding of an equilibrium in terms of those carbon credits. And I think that's quite interesting to consider. And the other thing, I love that you changed consumer to citizen. That's something we're trying to actively do. But I think there was something around managing expectations. As you said, consumers are expecting more and more things to be happening every year, something new, and bartenders are expecting to have these, international careers and all the rest. But actually, if we start managing expectations differently, and we address that we're all kind of in this situation together, and we get rid of this sense of FOMO, then we just can also rebalance, that need for the eccentricities. And as you can say, you can do it more sustainably, more well thought out, with the example of Hong Kong, which has turned into a fantastic new business opportunity.
Cool. Thank you.
Fantastico. Right. Over to
Ara now.
Ara, who knows
all the way from Amsterdam.
All about offsetting carbon, don't you, Ara?
Hello, thank you so much. I'm Ara.
Share your screen?
Yeah, I'm just figuring out whether I should do it now. But anyway, yeah.
In the meantime, if anyone has any questions for Jacob specifically, please use your Q&A box and he can answer some of them live.
So just checking, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool, thank you. Thank you very much for joining, and Steph and team, thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm Ara Carvallo. I'm the co-founder of Barra Mexico, and as Tim said, portfolio director at Distill Ventures. So I will just tell you a little bit about our journey to sustainability, which is slightly different to what other events have done. So I hope any of this you find useful. So basically we are, Barra Mexico is partial in Latin America and Mexico City, especially. It takes once per year. It takes, we have around 5,000 people joining and more than 100 stands. This next year will take place in August. We've been running this year will be the 6th year, but of course, COVID, then we're going to do next year will be our 6th event. We're definitely I would say the most established event in Latin America, and for sure the most progressive in the world. And this is my business partner, Paula. We're both, we are both activists, both environmentalists, and really committed to equity and peace. And also we really got good drinks. Barra Mexico is a purpose-driven company, so really, really, really want to incite change. That's what we are here for. So I think there's maybe 3 big things we did to become a sustainable show. And I think the first one is to really be the change at home. You want to be out there. That was for us very important. So the first thing we did right at the beginning, we said we really want to be the change at home. So we went out and hired women. So this is on the left, you'll see our team. It's my business partner, and I'm Valeria. You can also see the social media team. We also work with female-led agencies, only female-led agencies. This is our production team, which is a lot of fun. But also we make sure we put female bartenders on the forefront. So you will see here the key visual of Barra Mexico 2 years ago was 15 of the best bartenders in Mexico City. And then last year's key visual is Annie Barrera, a great bartender for 50 meals, which was our star. But also, we make sure we have seminars given by women. And we also make sure we have events, female events. And the reason for that is that you'll see there's plenty of research. There's many researchers working on this, and what's the role of women in sustainability. And most research would tell you that women have a continued motivation to work toward greater sustainability. We are more empathetic, we're more compassionate, and we are also more, we have less carbon footprint, but we also pay more attention to detail and more resilient to can work easier with change. So sustainability is important. It's important to have women in the team that actually take decisions. Being in the same line of being the change we want to be at home, we also have a great team of colleagues with disabilities who are at the registration desk. This is Edgar, who is a 2-time world champion in wheelchair dancing. So when you walk in Barra Mexico, he will be the one rating you, and then we have a team who are receiving and scanning the tickets. So I think it's all about having really the cause at the core. Then the second big step is, especially in a country like Mexico, where you have earthquakes, you have violence, you have high political risk. It's important to have a long-term vision. If you want to really bring change, you have to cut it in many small pieces, because we also needed to have a good working company. And if we want to change the world from one day to the other, we could also run really high risk. So I guess what we decided is it's just important to have what's the big term goal. And our big term goal is to do no harm. That our event reduces, doesn't do any harm to the environment, but also inspire the industry not to do harm to the environment. That's a very big thing you can do. But we thought about what is actually not doing harm. Number one is not emitting more CO2 or trying to reduce as much greenhouse emission from the event and from everything around the event. Number two is water. Try to save as much water as we can. And number three is education. So there's only so much we as Barra Mexico can do. So we just want to make sure we can inspire or educate as much as we can the people that come and the brands so they can be the change. So I'll just give you some concrete actions. That's the team. Last year were the first time we became carbon neutral. The first carbon neutral in the show, in the world. And basically the way to do it is looking at every single activity that takes place before, during, and after Barra Mexico. So all the flights from the people that come to Barra Mexico, my flights back and forth from Holland, all the carbon emitters from the construction of stands, all the cars, all the food, everything we took together. We worked together with ProNatura, which is an ONG that measures carbon and has different conservation projects. And we asked them to tell us how much carbon are we emitted and asked them to help us out reducing the CO2 emissions. So we looked at waste, no plastic allowed in Barra Mexico, a lot of recycling going on. This is a really nice example. Every single bottle at Barra Mexico gets recycled by Cerrando el Ciclo. This is an ONG that works with women in vulnerable communities, shows them how to recycle and do some craft work with glass. So all the bottles that come from Barra Mexico become some beautiful jewels or some beautiful type of, it can be different things that are later sold by them. So that's one way of recycling. We do different activities. I just show some highlights. Then the second one, that's carbon. So what we cannot compensate, which is 330 tons of CO2, that's verified by ProNatura, which is a very well-established carbon measurement, has a well-established carbon measurement system. What we did is we went to Oaxaca in January. We compensated by invested in a project of reforestation. So you can see me there, and you can see the Sierra Norte. And it's a very nice picture of my business partner drinking mezcal. So in Oaxaca, there is this ritual that every time the communities go in the forest, they have to drink a shot of mezcal and pour one shot of mezcal on the floor. So that's really to have harmony with Mother Earth. And of course, we really like mezcal, so we don't complain. And then second one is water. So carbon footprint and water footprint. Normally a bar show, Barra Mexico would actually use 37 liters of water, just toilets and washing glasses. But we had this different technology that you can wash a glass without soap, with biodegradable soap and without water, with a little bit of water. So we only use 6,000 liters. So we saved more than 30,000 liters of water. And of course, the big elephant in the room is, I'm not sure there's a big discussion about it, but a burger uses more than 3,000 liters to create a burger, and also beef. There's all these different metrics, but it's thousands and thousands of liters to produce animal food, to produce burgers, meat. And also 18% of the greenhouse gases come from animal production. So we would be very hypocritical if we say that we are a carbon neutral show, but keep serving burgers and hot dogs at the bar show. So we had a plant-based food court. So there were no animal products allowed in the show. And of course we have a lot of resistance, and we got a couple of people were insulted also, my business partner and myself, because they were angry that we didn't serve any meat. But it was part of our ethos. So we were a plant-based show. Then the third part, so water footprint, carbon footprint, and education is the last one. We had cues all around the show about conservation and environmental issues. For example, every single seminar room had a name of an animal that's in extinction, in risk of extinction. So that's the Save the Jaguar seminar room. You see Rebecca and Tomek there. We had also Save the Vaquita. We also had really nice dynamics. So when you would buy a ticket of Barra Mexico, you could give $1.5 more to compensate your footprint. It means when you come from, I don't know, when you come from somewhere else to the show, we gave that possibility, which actually we already compensate everything, but it's more about showing, educating the visitors that they actually, everything that they do has a footprint. And to our surprise, 35% of the visitors, they bought the compensation program, which is really, really high. You think about the airline industry in Germany, which is a very green-minded society, 5% of flyers, frequent flyers compensate. So you think 35% of bartenders in Mexico compensate. It was around 300 bartenders. We did a research that did this. So when you will come to the show, if you compensated, you would get a green bracelet. If you didn't, then you have a white bracelet. And we saw that people with a green bracelet were showing them around. So I think that was something to just, there's some type of pride of being green, some type of pride of being green in the industry. And then we were just giving information at every single place where we think people would stand up and finish their drink about environmental policies at Barra Mexico. The most, I guess, the most rewarding part is when brands, we shared constantly that are kind of a big objective with brands, and brands started also presenting that at Barra Mexico. So this is an Nespresso, the stand of Nespresso last year talking about recycling. We also had Absolute, of course, Absolute do a great job with carbon neutrality, but they were also talking a lot about sustainability. And then we have Luis Niño from Escala Mores also talking about sustainability. So I think there's, as I said, there's only so much you can do as an event organizer, but when the brands and the visitors and the exhibitors start taking over the narrative, then that's when you have an impact. So yeah, so basically it's all around thinking what is the bar of the future, what do I want the bar of the future to be like, and then thinking it back, and that's how we came up with our sustainability policy. And that's it.
Yeah, I think a huge round of applause from everybody watching and listening at it. It is beyond inspirational. And I love the way you've broken it down for us to really understand that it's all these layers that I think sometimes we just overlook, you know? And if anything, you've just brought a lot of awareness into the room. So thank you very much for that.
I think what's really great about this is for a lot of people, they see sustainability as an extra cost. Whereas you've shown it to be a massive value add that's really driven the success of Barra Mexico as one of the great trade shows of the world. So congratulations for everything that you've done. It's just amazing.
Thank you.
It's interesting as well that the human psyche around, you know, the controversy of having only a plant-based food proposition, which ultimately should be unoffensive to anybody, right? And it's curious that that's the reaction that occurred. But I think, again, it brought the awareness and it brought the conversation, right? And so there is positive in the negative.
Yeah, I kind of like the flipping on its head as being a vegan at normal trade shows. It's kind of try and hunt the single stand that does some vegan food.
Or eat chips.
And then to flip that on its head, so that every stand, it's like try and hunt the meat, try and find some meat. Anyway, we're not going to have a discussion about veganism. So we move on to our next speaker.
Yes, please.
So bottom right, the fabulous hair. So Jenna, Diageo's global whiskey ambassador, is going to talk to us now about the future of these amazing roles in the industry that are so sought after by so many bartenders. So over to you, Jenna.
Thank you, team. Yeah, thanks everybody. It was extremely interesting to listen to Ara and Jacob and great insight in there. I'm Jenna. My name's Bar, so I've always been a global Bar because that's my surname. However, as a brand ambassador, I'm kind of generation 2020. And that actually means that I had to look at how do I organize my work stream, how do I go pursue my exploring, and how do I go through the like batches of interest that I have in very much confined from my kitchen and my living room. But in the same time, I tried to look, okay, what are kind of the tools in my toolbox? And I knew that, yes, I've been a scout, so I've loved my connection with nature and like growing things. But in the same time, I'm a cinema lover, and there's just so much inspiration that I take from science fiction and cyberpunk, for example. So I've kind of set it a bit as an opportunity in a way, with having like sustainability and digital words, let's say, for me was, okay, so what movie would I like to travel to immerse in that world? And what would I do there? And then what if I could write that movie for myself in a way and to share it? So from that kind of perspective is that we all realize that change is fast. It doesn't really wait for us, but we need to develop reflexes and kind of the priorities. And in this context, I really needed to start from a point in which I was like, what do I actually care most about? What is very human in a way and will continue? And where does like real life, virtual reality, augmented reality, and everything really meet regardless? So I've landed into choice architecture, which really helps me define a bit. And then I think I've been able to share this. Yeah, perfect. So I've made a map of basically some of the ideas and things that come out of my curly hair and turn into things that I really care about. And I was hoping, and I'm still working, and it's going to work to help me find the people, the organizations that consider the same challenges and opportunities as I do, because there is something in the power of alignment and like making almost on this territory. So for me, this idea of choice architecture is kind of helps. We know that decisions are so much by layout. As in an example of like Barra, Mexico, where would have been like the vegan food or not, and how do you go? And like when we travel through airport, we know the most how much choice architecture is there to like design what we think we have available. But for me, through designing this kind of mind map, really helped me understand how can I pivot and adapt, and what really matters, and am I working on the projects that matter to me. And then actually helped me to look at what is everybody else doing. And then I was looking at education, and it's been like so interesting to see how it mixes with entertainment online, and how we've seen dancing, cocktails being made while somebody's dancing, and we've seen cooking and cocktail making, and we've seen all that like cool responsible drinking messages. My colleagues are making a Scotch radio show, which is quite brilliant because it's not about Scotch, it's about music, but you're gonna hear some snippets of Scotch information in there. But then I've really been touched on engagement and rituals. And there was like, especially a territory where I was like kind of curious, how do you feel that you are not alone? And it's been so nice to see like bar shakers being passed around the world. And there's been like cocktail cheers and like cocktail crosswords. One of our colleagues who looks after Copper Dog in GB, Andy, has over 300,000 views on a song that it's inspired by this Copper Dog that he designed and wrote and sung in isolation. So there's many ways to get people to land into being interested in your message. Because what I'm always saying is that my purpose isn't necessarily selling or selling. My purpose is revealing. It's showing the possibilities, the options, the joys, the flavor profiles that are out there. So even on there, if you're moving like on the map, we've got this innovation. And I think that's where like world-class community work was great in digital, because we managed to like have conversations around the world, but I tried to step in what I'm interested in. So I was really interested in what is convenience within innovation. How can we democratize access to great cocktails without being location dependent? So then what happens within craft cocktail delivers and tasting flights, and how cocktail and food work together? There's been just so much interest, and the potential for like Zoom to even have breakout rooms in which little concepts get further debated was just extraordinary to see that actually technology has been an extension of me to be able to have a morning chat coffee with Australia, and like working with Africa and Europe around in the daytime, and then the day with like Brazil and America, the US. So I'd say that's extremely interesting. But when you see in purpose, there's like, I find that big match in there, and I guess global governments are looking at that as well. How do we balance people, planet, and profit? Because they're all kind of necessary in working out a better tomorrow. So I remember I've loved Glastonbury as a festival. I do like in-life gatherings and people getting together and celebrating and showcasing each other what they're excited about. And Glastonbury always said, leave no trace. While that is possible in some contexts, not in other, I was like, how do I try my best to leave a positive trace? So that's been a bit one of like my pivoting ways within it. But kind of what it all means to me is that we live in the space in which sustainable and digital capabilities and responsibilities are kind of spread, they're cultivated and distributed across everyone. And that kind of gives us the power to be all agents of change. Hence, I think it's easier to be an agent of change when you kind of count the territories you can play. So you're able to focus a bit into where your spikes, your strengths, and your interests go. But what I've discovered looking at it and talking to my colleagues was quite cool. And this is kind of some powers that BAs are uniquely equipped with. And this is kind of even a call to say to organizations and to people, work closer with your people who are from the trade, are brand ambassadors. A BA is a bartender in many cases. And that means that the brain is in foraging mode. You know, it gives us this power to accept ideas coming from everywhere. And rather, if I take them from Mad Max and Ready Player One, or if I take them from La Berte or La Belle Verte or Cloud Atlas, I can always find something that inspires me. And that could be from simply like picking up gardening or picking up rubbish or whatever you do. And that's kind of the go explore the opportunity in there. Our eyes tends to be on the street and ears. So there's so much knowledge of the temperature and the mood of food and drinks and the wider culture of it that BAs tend to interestingly have. And then being service orientated, I do realize that makes everybody natural collaborator. Everybody's a bit like, what are you working on? How can I help? What's going on? And that to me seems very natural, but then other people have managed to highlight it. No, that means that there's a background in an industry where you're not going to let somebody carry all the cases of beer into the venue by itself, and you're going to jump hand and make a chain. Then there's like this hospitality experience that gives so much care and attention for details, which actually gets us the capacity to kind of anticipate outcomes in a way. And then the more diverse the backgrounds and the most diverse the interactions, that means that minds can be like open as parachutes and gives this capacity to work so cross-disciplinary. So I think from that perspective, when you look at what's in our toolbox, all these skills, then how do we apply them to design our jobs for tomorrow? Because I think to a certain extent, BAs and bartenders are kind of perfect idea machines. You know, they've got these like memories and think about storaging all the recipes and all the flavor vocabulary, and, you know, somebody calling you in the middle of the night and asking what's the spec for a bijou, for example. But in the same time, you've got this, you should be, and you're getting equipped because that's are the tools that our organizations are there to help us. So we have these sparkling communication tools, and there's like so many digital natives amongst us, and everybody has this thirst to share ideas. So I think that there is a lot in this idea machine that potentially we can help ourselves, our industry, and our organizations with. So I need to change this slide. Perfect. I'm not sure if I've...
You should be, yeah, there you go.
Has it gone to you? Okay, perfect. There we
Yes,
are.
got it.
All right. Oh. I might have just refilled all my slides, but there's not many of them because we're wrapping this up. I think that trying to look almost like fractal of everything, I would say I trust the BA model as long as it's ever evolving. There should be jobs that mold according to culture, according to technology, and to individual strengths. And they've very much done so. However, the drive to improve never really ends. So if we think that every idea creates new paths, I would say that a lot of it has been, and I've kind of seen it, and maybe started to look like in the old world, there was a lot of like performing culture in real life interaction, which is wonderful and beautiful. But pre and after the online is still paramount regarding the event. So there's been like traveling and performing and presentations and dinners. No, you have that. But then we've been kind of confined to our houses and made us a lot like cultural detectives, in which you're asking questions and you do listening. And it's almost, I would say, I felt at times like I'm an RPG gamer, kind of exploring different scenarios and what collaborations are possible and what networks of propagating ideas are there out there. But then from performing culture to being a cultural detective, and then to like creating culture, which it's been said to be like the sport of our time in a way, with like the models of influencing and things like TikTok and Instagram and all that. And I would say in here there's the opportunity to be like a cultural engineer in a way. Because these, as you see on like my right hand on the map, there's like talking about old luxury and new luxury. So what's material exclusivity with what is actually access and access to knowledge and the knowledge about this. So from in there, this cultural engineering, it kind of gives us the chance to look at a UX, like a user experience design as a mindset. You know, it can make like kind of the digital technologies to skyrocket any seeding. If it's brand seeding, if it's idea seeding, if it's a sustainable idea seeding. And I'd say if anybody's seen Ready Player One or read the book or listen to the audiobook, even better. It's quite interesting because there we're looking at VR. And what I've seen is got this amazing capacity to create curiosity and empathy. And I've seen a VR at Sundance that was actually about some tribes from the Amazonia, and you were just immersed there. So when I went after that experience, it felt to a certain extent as close as like feeling and caring, but sometimes it feels when you meet a stranger at the pub and you have a short 20-minute conversation about their life. I say that the mindset is the most important, and think about what are the opportunities to work within your values and within your company's values, and like sustainability and digitization and like kind of spreading information. But how can you add digital layers to it? How can you add digital layers to physical things? And how can that help help like storytelling and engagement? But as my conversation with Tim highlighted in there, balance is super key in all that. So it all started at like, how do we balance reach and engagement? Because that's the first possibility that kind of this new world of work brings up. You can engage with, and I'm going to think about what is the reach of passing by a window shop and just acknowledging that something is there. And what would be the engagement that you get by spending 4 hours in a secret cinema event. So there needs to be an accounting to what and how do you go for those. But in the same time, somewhere in between style and substance, because some things tend to be overly entertaining, the way you think, what is the substance of it all? And I would say on even more on when we're talking about digitization and like bringing things, that's why I'm so excited that Alex is following with VR. What's the balancing between portability and immersion? But then when we're talking about the sustainability of ourselves as human beings, what's kind of this balancing between going out and being out there, if it's on a screen or just going out with us, and going in and just analyzing what's going on in your brain, what's touched you, what really matters, and how can you do your job within what really matters. And I am not trying to predict the future, by all means, as a BA, as a person, but what I'm trying to do is to explore the many possibilities that the future opens up. Because in a way that's kind of a prerequisite for all of us to explore possibilities and then kind of share some of that knowledge, so we're able to go for the best opportunities from a sustainability way. And I see technology kind of an extension of my human abilities. And I do tell myself that every day I should try and do something for which a future self is going to thank me. And from that perspective, I hang out in like skate parks and just see how 20 years old engage with the phone, and I realize I'm an aging millennial, potentially. But it's kind of, how do you try? So every month I try to block 1-2 hours in which I just download all the apps I can and play with them and kind of review them for them to see what's out there, what's been forefront, what has chances to potentially change the way I engage with things or create presentations. And while I'm saying that virtual life is not going to replace in real life, but can magnify it. And it's such a tool to like deep dive immersion in a very distinct world. And I think that's what excites me a lot about how can we create these very distinct worlds. And I'm going to leave you on kind of a funny invitation. Just imagine that I get Alex tools and get to play a bit with some UX design and engage with other people who are like really painting in HTC and like dreaming the future. And I'd say, come to me or come with me to K2. So we talk about Darwin. And taste the record one. Come to me to Mammoth Cave, which is like the longest cave labyrinth, which is in Kentucky, to actually see what limestone looks like when the water's gone through it, and why limestone water is so important for Kentucky straight bourbon. So I think there's a lot of possibility out there, and it's a lot about kind of what this AE and not AI guy, Albert Einstein, said some time ago. Thank you so much. That's it from me.
Thank you, Jenna. There was some very powerful wisdom bombs there. And I love that you've taken the time to rethink things in a way that I think a lot of us, when we've come into brand ambassador roles, it was plug and play. It was established. There was a playbook, and you just kind of had to fit in and go hard and go strong. And actually, COVID's given you this fantastic opportunity to try and work it out for yourself and maybe reassess and reassert what a brand ambassador role can look like in 2020 and how you can have positive impact above and beyond just driving education around spirits, right? So pretty cool stuff. Any thoughts, Tim?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I was thinking we've got 3 generations of ambassadors in the room.
Who's the OG? You or
the OG is definitely Jacob. Like, Jacob was the first brand. I didn't even know they existed before I met Jacob, when he turned up in his white lab coat as the vodka professor.
Was he Jacob? Were you one of the ones that invented it? Did you invent the BA?
No. Well, really, a guy called Gregor Katanak, who started it, kind of the forerunner of Diageo in the early 80s, kind of started the role. But I started in 2002, so I'm definitely an older vintage than Jenna, that's for sure.
Yeah, and then I guess it was me and you, Steph, and now Jenna is redefining what that role is. Especially
I like what she's doing.
Yeah, me too. I love it. Especially kind of bringing in all that technology and new thinking. I think Diageo have got a very exciting young ambassador on their hands. Absolutely.
And culture front and center, Jenna.
And I love the link, like Jenna's embrace of modern technology like AR and VR and sci-fi, and using that. And I guess that just leads so seamlessly into Alex. I'm getting better at these segues.
Awesome. Well, what a privilege and a terrifying responsibility to try and follow Jacob, Ara, and Jenna. But I'll do my best. So let's see. Let's try and share a screen, shall we? There we go. So as Tim said in his lovely introduction, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Arcade. And we call ourselves the spatial agency. And many of us will have encountered words like spatial and things like immersive technology and some of the things that Jenna was just talking about. And clearly, some of the intros actually got me thinking, because that idea that I'm going to somehow talk about the future reminded me of the probably quite cliched William Gibson quote that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I guess it's been quite an interesting time for those of us working in tech, particularly in emergent tech, over the last few months, because in many ways, necessity being the mother of invention has dramatically accelerated that distribution. of some of this technology. So some of these experiences, some of these spatial experiences are getting closer and closer to us, partly because they're out there, the technology is getting better and better, but mostly because the consumer appetite for them, by a combination of desire but also need, has increased exponentially. So whilst we can't possibly be thankful to coronavirus for too many things, it has had some interesting knock-on effects, particularly for people who are working in our space. So when we say spatial, we mean the kind of the transition or the addition, probably better, of three-dimensional digital experience to the two-dimensional digital experiences that we're so familiar with, like the kind of thing that we're all enjoying now, and has become very familiar again over the last few months to those of us who weren't too close to it before. Just very briefly, I'm always conscious that, you know, much as Jenna has shown that she obviously is completely au fait with this stuff, and so please switch off for the next 30 seconds, Jenna. But for others, you know, there is still this sort of, you know, interest, but a very, very understandable lack of awareness around some of these technological terms. So, you know, immersive technologies, typically we talk about these two sister technologies of augmented reality on the one hand, virtual reality on the other, and they are sister technologies because they all share this idea of three-dimensional digital content and digital experience, which means things are no longer just on a flat screen, but somehow we can move around them and experience them in a much, much closer way to how we would experience things in the real world. Very briefly, augmented reality is the bringing in of digital content to our physical surroundings. So you'll see a few examples of that coming up. And that's different to virtual reality in the sense that virtual reality takes us away from where we are, takes us to places like Mammoth Cave, for example, or places like the moon, as you can see here, or maybe even to places that don't even exist in reality. So virtual reality is very good for that. It's not better or worse. There are certainly huge pros and cons, and that's an hour plus presentation in itself. But those are the technologies that we kind of play with. And I suppose, you know, for transparency, I can't hand on heart, I feel slightly regretful about this, but I can't hand on heart say that, you know, we're doing this with sustainability at the forefront of our kind of mission. But what we do as creative technologists is that we're very, very proud of the impact. Some of it is just inherent, some of it is much more conscious and driven of the impact that this can have on sustainable practice across multiple sectors. So obviously we're going to be talking about the drinks industry, but you'll see some of the examples. We work across a whole variety of sectors, and those sustainability benefits are really, really prevalent and becoming stronger and stronger and more important in everything we do. So I was trying to think of like the best way to just briefly, hopefully briefly, introduce kind of, you know, what we do with this technology. And you can slice and dice it in a million ways. You know, you can look at it, which technologies it uses or which sectors it works in, but maybe the most useful is splitting out the experiences that are more for kind of the physical visitors at particular locations. So the traditional event, the pop-up bar, all of the things that we've talked about so far are really good examples of that. You know, visitor attractions, heritage sites, these things all fall into that kind of location-based experience world. That contrasts with experiences that are more designed to be experienced remotely, you know, by anybody, by anywhere they are rather, and they can take multiple forms. But there's quite a useful separation in terms of the nature of the experience, the nature of the audience types, but also the nature of the sustainability benefits. So, you know, very briefly, we'll look at sort of a few physical examples first. You know, we worked with Sea Life. This was with the London Aquarium, and we can use this technology to create certain substitution effects. So this was about creating a CGI character called Roxy, who you can see there. Forgive me, I haven't got a film for this one. I'm going to brave a film or two in a moment, and hopefully it works out. But she came in, her role was to engage families, kids and their families, with these incredible creatures, to slow them down in a way that would be fantastic if each visitor and each family could have a subject matter expert there with them, accompanying them on their tour. But of course, that's not feasible for all kinds of practical reasons. It becomes far too resource intensive. So this is a way of bringing technology in that, yep, it's got huge benefits in terms of the experience. It's doing something new, something different. Jacob, you talked about, you know, the importance of the experience economy and the drive to novelty. It ticks those boxes. But importantly for the organization and the owner, it has tremendous benefits resource-wise. And of course, that knocks on into sustainability as well, you know, saving material resource, saving on travel, and experiences like that. This is the video that we'll cross our fingers for. Let's see if this works. oh, there we go. That's sort of coming into focus. So this was with Welsh National Opera. And this, again, very location based and an interesting example of what we would call mixed reality. So another new term just to throw at you. And this is where we get digital content. Jenna, you just talked about adding layers to the physical things, to physical experience. So those arches you can see there, those aren't digital. Those are real. Those are wooden. But importantly, they're designed to be durable. So the experience can tour. And from our perspective, it gets really exciting with things like that, where we can start to bring in an overlay digital experience that in this case was designed to introduce audiences of all types to the themes of a particular opera called The Cunning Little Vixen. It was on at the Millennium Centre. It was due to be coming to South Bank in London before COVID. So thanks for that. But hopefully it'll come back as and when. But yeah, really interesting examples of bringing in that digital experience, which again, otherwise have been bit more resource intensive if you were trying to achieve something similar in other means. Again, still, this is one that we're working on right now with UK Parliament, where this one is entirely digital. And actually, a huge part of the pitch for this is all about sustainability. So you have these huge spaces, of which Westminster Hall that you can see here is one. And one option is to create these physical installations, much like a pop-up event or any kind of temporary installation. And with all of the accompanying resource requirements and ultimately material waste that comes with that. Here, we can use digital to create what we would say, of course, is to be an even more engaging experience, but it does so without that material waste and without that requirement for installation, for maintenance, for costly removal and disposal and replacement, all these things where digital can take its place. Again, I can talk for much longer on that, but it's a very, very straight substitution of bringing in digital. Yes, it enhances the experience. It does things that you can't do physically, but looking at it through a sustainability lens, it has a really powerful impact as well. One that gets closer to the world that I'm sure many of you are in. So working with Be At One, and this one sort of straddles both. It's really designed for users at the bars, and this is a hidden menu, secret menu, which is not in itself a radical thought, but a really interesting way of adding to the cocktail experience. So users, visitors to Be At One are able to scan those little symbols, that triangular symbol you can see there hidden on the menu. And if you're in the know, it plays to that real sense of discernment and sophistication, connoisseurship, that if you do know it's there, you can find these cocktails and then you can go and order them. So it's quite nice, it's quite simple, it's quite beautiful and quite different. But again, it can also be used wherever you are. If you happen to have perhaps stolen one of those cocktail menus, or even have a copy of just that image, you can do it anywhere. So you can access some of these cocktail things. And in this case, they're quite static, albeit with some lovely sparkles around them. But of course, you can do so much more with 3D assets, with animations, with instructional videos, how to create your own. And if it's beautiful enough and engaging enough as an experience, it means it becomes really interesting to people wherever they happen to be. And then we go over, and this is the only one I'll show you, which is not one of ours, because I want to sort of focus on what we've been doing, but really like it. It's actually quite an old brand now. It's 2 or 3 years old, 19 Crimes, made a huge splash because they are one of the first, if not the first, to really put AR at the core of their user experience. Just, I think a couple of weeks ago, they launched their latest wine with Snoop Dogg. And I think I can bring him to life. I mean, it does kind of what you'd expect, which is that he then talks, as do all of the criminals on their bottles of wine, talks about his experience, how he got there, why he did it. And so it's quite an interesting heritage experience, but of course it's really about brand storytelling. You need the bottle, but beyond that, wherever you are as a user, somehow it's a way of getting you closer to the brand, and also using the what's been called kind of the most valuable owned media a brand or an organization is likely to have. In this case, it's packaging, to tell these stories in a really, really interesting way. This one, Tim, I know you've seen this. You gave us a lovely little comment on Facebook, on LinkedIn. This is something we've been doing with the US in the music world. And this is really interesting because it's about bringing gigs. Now, for our purposes, we can call this performance or experience. It doesn't have to be a band, obviously, but it uses actually quite simple techniques. Those are all musicians who were individually filmed against a green screen background. So they're just 2D planes presented as video, but with the alpha cut out around them. So it looks like they're standing there as full holograms in a 3D stage environment. This video doesn't show it, but you can scale up to 1-to-1 size or even bigger. So you can take some of those techniques and principles, and of course, your imagination runs riot. We're talking about the need to fly brand ambassadors or those star tenders around the world. Jacob, you mentioned kind of the Zoom scalable experience. Well, what happens when you bring that bartender into the space as a hologram? And maybe this one isn't live, but the ability to do that kind of thing live is getting better and better, and becomes very, very feasible. So experientially brilliant, sustainability brilliant. You can also go, this is an example of more of the VR. Everything we've seen up until now, I think, has been examples of more AR. This is more of a culture and heritage space, a gallery that we designed. But the key point here is that creating these virtual environments, three-dimensional environments that you can walk through. How am I doing for time? Am I right for time? I've got 2 or 3 more minutes. I will just try. Thank you. I will, if I can, is this going to work? I might just try and hop over. Here we go. So this is me. I'm in the gallery. This is using a platform called Mozilla Hubs. If anybody's played any kind of, first person or third person computer game, we're familiar with the ability to move around environments. But of course, what those environments look like, in this case, it's a photo gallery, an exhibition, but I can be in here. And importantly, I can be in here with multiple people at the same time. It becomes Alex, a very social space.
It's still showing the your previous
Oh, slide. No.
I think you need to...
And do you know what? I'm not even going to bother. I'm not even going to bother. Right. I'll try and share it.
You can imagine.
You can. So I now need to get back to my presentation, which is there. Yeah, okay. So basically what you couldn't see was me walking around in that space. Apologies for that. What we're looking at is actually a class of school children who live very close to the museum who was putting on this exhibition. This was a few weeks before they broke up for the summer, and it was the first time that the class had been able to kind of come back together again since lockdown, and they loved it. It was really great. But my point is that, of course, these virtual environments, particularly in a social context, can be designed to look and feel however we want. It can have whatever content and experiences inside them, and they can be shared. So cutting down, obviously, on the need for travel. I mean, I do want to make the really important point, and fully supporting what's been said before about the need for balance. Again, Jenna, you talked about that. Stephanie, you talked about that. A lot of this stuff is not designed to replace face-to-face experience, but it is designed to complement it, and potentially to create that sense of balance between digital experience and the physical experience that comes with all of those sustainability challenges. So that's sort of everything I wanted to show. I mean, the benefits clearly are around, that substitution effect for material usage and waste. It's around labor. So then we get to travel costs. And of course, just cost, the financial benefits of this are also really important. And I suppose the last point to touch on really is that there's probably a common perception, and in some cases it's justified, but in many cases it's not, that some of this emergent tech and some of these experiences, because they're new, because we haven't seen them before, they must therefore be very expensive. And increasingly, it's just not the case. It was heading in that direction anyway, as technology tends to do. But back to the COVID effect, we've seen such huge advance in technology just over the last few months. And allied with consumer adoption and the behaviors around that, it's a really interesting time to be able to create these experiences quicker, easier, and therefore cheaper than ever before. And just a very quick demonstration of that. There's a great app, which this will either convince you of this or completely convince you it's a waste of time. This took me about approximately 90 seconds or so to create before I came on this call. You can now see what I'm wearing on my bottom half. And this is a scanned avatar of me using nothing more than my phone and an app, and that was it. When I say 90 seconds, I really mean it. Obviously, a model like that can be optimized, but it was so quick to make. It was so easy. So doing things that are of high quality, that don't have a sort of funny beard thing running down my neck, as that seems to do, are really within reach. This stuff is out there. It's really easy to do. It's fun. It's different. And of course, the benefits to sustainability are huge. And I think I should probably stop there, should I?
That was awesome. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Pretty decent little avatar you made for yourself. And I think
thank you.
Technology, it's such a fascinating concept. And I feel that a lot of us fear this digital world that you're showcasing, AR and VR. And as you say, like, oh my gosh, it's going to replace actually doing things for real. but somehow, you know, we're more embracing of it when it comes to production. And somehow when it's activation, we're more hesitant. And it's because, yeah, we're scared to lose our human connections. But I'm sure all the gamers that are listening will agree that they can connect in a very real way, right? In the digital space.
And, you know, I think more than that, what's been really rewarding to see, actually before COVID even, that some of those experiences, like the one at Welsh National Opera, you know, sure, kids, you know, gamers are going to be more naturally attuned to the experience. But when you put somebody who you wouldn't necessarily expect to be able to deal with it especially well, you know, the stereotypes, if you're slightly older, if you're not into some of that technology, there is a difference and you can't deny that, but it's such an interestingly easy barrier to overcome for so many people. And, you know, the COVID effect has been to accelerate that amongst people that you wouldn't normally expect to engage with technology, and actually has equipped, I think, has equipped society with far more technical ability and far more technical desire for technology than it would have had otherwise. And as much as we don't want to abuse that because it's not going to replace human connection, and it can't do, I love Ready Player One, the book and the film, but I don't particularly want that future where we live in a virtual world. I really don't, but I do want a world where we can use technology for real purpose, for real impact. It's not just a gimmick, it can actually have genuine real world benefits. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, and I think you can create that most valuable of things, which is the wow factor. You know, and you know, we're an industry that is so based upon storytelling. To be able to use your technology to just make that storytelling much more immersive, I think is extremely powerful. And using it as a tool rather than a replacement, as you said.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Awesome.
So should we open up any questions?
Yeah, we have a few minutes. If there are any at all, we'd love to hear from our audience today. You know, even panelists, you may have a question that you'd like to ask each other. Please feel free to connect.
Anyone? We've lost Ara, unfortunately. She had to dash off on a personal emergency. So if you have any questions about the incredible work she does at Barra, Mexico, let us know, and we'll get her to answer them, and we can put them into the report that goes out in a couple of weeks' time.
Maybe I've got one, if that's all right.
Of course.
So, I mean, I amongst the panelists, I'm the only non-brand ambassador, non-bartender here. I mean, I'd be fascinated. There's obviously a lot of self-interest in this, but I'd be fascinated to understand, in an industry that relies so heavily, obviously, on physical product. You know, the drinks industry can't exist without that. So there is no sense that we can replace it. How does the idea of, you know, an experience that is that bit more digital, or sort of trying to bring the digital and the physical together, what does that make a bartender or a brand ambassador feel? Is it exciting? Is it scary? Is it both?
We'll try and answer that first, if you like. I mean, I think people in the spirits and cocktail world and in the bar world tend to be both extremely tech savvy and then also slightly not backwards looking, but sort of slightly retro in their, you know, so they're it's a prevailing kind of modern world need, if you like, as people barrel down through digital connection, they also feel slightly disconnected from the physical world around them and the communities in which they live. And so you have people kind of desperately trying to sort of create sort of more established roots in slower culture. So, you know, one of those crafts, if you like, has been bartending, just like, you know, so these old-fashioned rituals, going to a local bar in your neighborhood, having a coffee at some kind of handmade barista rather than a takeaway, you know, acquiring sourdough bread rather than, you know, although now, of course, we all know how to make it ourselves. So I think there's a duality in the bar and restaurant world quite heavily, between being both very tech savvy and kind of almost anti-tech. So I think when it's done with a light touch, it can work really, really well. And I think, you know, to steal Jenna's excellent example about, you know, the limestone caves, which give you the water, which is such a, you know, central part of both Kentucky and bourbon, like that's transporting you to a very, very kind of physical space. Obviously, you know, we tried, for example, to do, but it doesn't always work. We did a virtual reality partnership with Virgin Atlantic for a while, where we had 12 bars that recorded, created cocktails for Virgin lounges around the world, and you put on the VR goggles, and then suddenly the bartender from that bar was making the drink for you. Obviously, it was kind of less of a sustainable initiative because you were sitting in an airline lounge about to take a flight to an international thing, but it gave you the ability, if you were flying from London, to suddenly be at employees only in New York. But it was kind of very much like, hey, this is a cool gimmick, but it only really worked because the bartender in front of you was making you the drink at the same time. So it's that kind of ability to kind of, do something particularly analog and digital and hold the two in balance is where it works in the best way. I think a kind of full VR tasting or flyby through distilleries is probably something that would leave people maybe a little cold. They tend to like the tactile, but that's probably my take. I'm a different generation. Jenna may have a different opinion.
It's also very, very hard to drink a cocktail with a VR headset on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but it was just a way of kind of, allowing them to see different bars. And of course, the show-off effect, we included, one of the bars we included was Richard Branson's Private Island, where, you could get a daiquiri, and it was like, whoa, okay, that's where my airline fees have been going.
And I suppose to bring this back ultimately to the topic of what today's session was, which is causing a sustainable stir. When it comes to tech and sustainability, I do think it's all about this early adoption mindset, whereby if we do want to see things improve, we just have to get involved with it now. Our experience is at a different level with Tim, whereby we use electric cars to get about to our distillery, and all of a sudden 800 kilometers become 16 hours because the network for the chargers just isn't quite right yet. And it's painful, and we really suffer from it. But if we don't, as advocates for a more planet positive future and sustainability in the industry, don't even do that, then, how do we expect others to put themselves out there and try new things? So I think early adoption and actually, trying to be a bit patient with the tech can make a huge difference and speed things up for everyone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We have a question come in from Caitlin Wilkes. So I guess this one could go to Jacob and Jenna. So how do you think cocktail competitions will change in the new world?
Jacob?
Oh. Do you want to start, Jenna? Or
I think that it's quite interesting that everybody on the background is doing a lot of tests and pivoting and looking at it, and there's going to be a while in which loads of different things happen, because that's kind of how we adapt and how we get to the best recipe for everything. But I think what's going to be interesting is to see how is everything calculated in kind of the impact that is created where the competition is landed, and what's the impact that it has positively on the people getting there together, and how can all the value of those brains being in a territory be even more increased to the benefit of the network that is already there. So from my perspective, it's a lot about not only eliminating negative externalities, but looking how can you grow the positive ones, really.
I think probably the change will depend on what is the purpose of that particular cocktail competition, and how is the kind of mechanic by which they're run. Obviously, I'm extremely biased, having kind of helped create one, and then kind of working with a company where we do two extremely large, or three actually, Bombay Sapphire, Most Imaginative, Patron Perfectionists, and Bacardi Legacy, which have all taken, the prize at the end of each of those is the chance to kind of travel to a far-flung destination you'd never you'd never normally have the opportunity to see. And that's kind of, so I guess, first of all, can cocktail competitions just happen locally? I think there are some of those kinds of cocktail competitions which work well, but they tend to be more sort of quick draw, ready, steady, shake style examples. So low impact, low amount of work and investment of time on behalf of the bartender makes it equal to a kind of, one-off localized style prize. I think we have an example of this in the sense of, we have a large-scale Bombay Sapphire cocktail competition, which is hugely successful in the US. We get thousands of entrants. When we tried to bring it to the UK, where the prize was a trip to the Bombay Sapphire distillery, we didn't get a lot of interest because most London bartenders are like, well, that's 30 miles from London. So like I can go there myself, even though most of them never had. So, if it's requiring an extended amount of work, then there's a feeling, or there has been a feeling, that the prize needs to be some kind of, trip. And so perhaps we need to change the expectations about what's the payoff. I think one of the other things is, typically as well, the prize is often a chance to visit some kind of distillery you wouldn't otherwise do. So how can we make that worth people's time? So I think these are all questions we're, desperately trying to work through at the moment. And most of that we've taken the simple solutions, which is things like carbon offsetting and trying to, minimize waste from the actual running of the competitions, but changing the kind of whole mechanic and prize to be something like win a trip to your, win a trip from your bedroom to your lounge in a Zoom cocktail competition is probably not quite as compelling. Caitlin, I know you've entered many of these cocktail competitions, so that's probably almost a question for the people who enter cocktail competitions. What would seem a more sustainable kind of prize that would make you want to put in the same effort, and how could we bring those kind of same connections of community without flying you halfway around the world? Because those are questions we're dealing with right now.
And that feels like a whole entire separate positively charged thought tank session.
Yeah.
So we have run out of time, and obviously want to thank you all very much, Jacob, Alex, Jenna, and of course, Ara. It's fantastic. Thank you for taking some time to share some of these wisdoms with us, and hopefully all of you that are listening now or will be listening at a later stage feel positively empowered and inspired to deliver some form of planet positive change at whatever level you can. A quick plug for our beautiful little delicious natural apple spirit, Tim.
Yeah, a bit of a shameless one, this. We're currently, as probably, hopefully, most of you know, going through a crowdfunding phase. So we are opening up Avallen to anyone who would like to own a little piece of it. The idea behind this is rather than kind of just investing, having one or two investors come in, we wanted it to open it up to the industry and open it up to as many people as possible. We really are a brand that puts people, planet, and profit as the core of our business. So this is very much in the people side of things. We're a brand for the industry and for people. So we wanted to offer a little piece of our company to people in the industry. So our crowdfund is currently live. If you've ever wanted to own a little piece of a startup booze brand, ever wanted to boast to your friends that you own a cool company or part of a cool company, or you just want to do good whilst having a delicious drink, please follow the link and just have a little look at what me and Steph have put together. We would love to have you join our hive. We've set it at a very low barrier to entry. So one share to own is only £11.90. So about the price of a cocktail in a mid-price bar in London, or about half the price of a cocktail. So half the price of a cocktail.
Half the price of a cocktail at the corner.
Or the price of half of a cocktail at the Savoy. So we really wanted to make it possible for those that haven't ever invested before to be able to get a step up onto the investment ladder and maybe take one step forward towards financial security. We're not saying it's risk-free. There is always risk with any investment, but it's always worth kind of having a look at investments, because making your money make money is one of the keys to financial security.
Brilliant. Well, that was a proud plug, Tim, because it is very much about creating community and collective around brands that do good. So On that note, for those of us melting, I'm sure we're going to go and drench ourselves in the showers now. We will
Turn the
be
heater back on.
back next month with another Positively Charged series. And again, anyone watching, any ideas or subject matters that you'd like us to cover, please do reach out. We will be writing this report up, thanks to the wonderful wordsmith that is Yael. And it should be out as of next week for you all to read and enjoy. So yeah, well, that's kind of it.
Huge thanks to Alex, Jacob, Jenna, and Ara. You're absolutely fantastic. So thank you for taking the time to share your insights.
Thank you all.
Some knowledge with us.
Merci, Bucket.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Everyone have a fantastic Wednesday.
All right, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.